We're going to do a little exercise. If you look on the board, and it's, I think, in your book as well, but look at the board, you will see two pieces of art. And my question would be to those that are here or those that are listening, can you figure out their functions? You can take a guess. And I invite people listening at home at Zoom to also chime in.
The same function?
Rabbi, one looks like a nutcracker.
One looks like a nutcracker. Which one? The one on the right or the one on the left?
The one that looks like a teaspoon at the bottom.
The one that has a teaspoon at the bottom looks like a nutcracker. Okay. What? Okay, one is connecting, but let's see. What is the one on the left?
Like a snake.
A what? Hanging something. Okay. So what we said is that the first one on the right is a nutcracker, or it looks like a nutcracker, and the one on the left is something that you can hang. Perhaps you can hang a ring on it, right? You can hang a ring on it. Okay. There's a reason why we have this up, but I'm not going to give you the answer now. As we go in deeper into the class, we will figure it out. And I also want to say that we're going to be talking something which is beyond meaning, but I know that the class is called the Kabbalah of Meaning, and we haven't yet touched on Kabbalah. So I will give you a little secret. The Kabbalah part is first going to show up in class number 3. But in order to get to the Kabbalah part, we have to have the introduction, because to study Kabbalah in its mystical abstract form does us no good whatsoever. Then we just repeat concepts. The idea is, especially in Chabad, to be able to internalize it, to be able to understand it, that should be able to rest in our mind, it should resonate with us. So all this that we're doing is actually a preparation for the Kabbalistic concept, but it's all part of it. So this is very important. Okay, we're going to go now that we've done the exercise, and we're going to go back to Ecclesiastes. The board, the stuff on the board will come up soon, so I would rather you look into the textbooks. We are on page 38, but before we go to page 38, I would like to say, okay, so last week we learned all about finding meaning in life. What if somebody comes and says, who needs meaning? Can't you live life without meaning? Have you ever heard of YOLO? You live only once, right? So you only live once. That's what the YOLO is. So people say, if you only live once, live it up. Do whatever you want. Try to live as much as possible. Work hard, play hard, and have fun. What's wrong with that? What do you need meaning? I'm going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy myself. Make ends meet, and then you can do that. Some people even talk about a bucket list, which the term bucket list doesn't resonate with us much, because when you hear somebody say about somebody dying that they kicked the bucket, it's a very derogatory way of speaking of something as holy as transitioning from this life into the next life. It's not about a bucket, and it's not about a can. So, but the bucket list means that before you kick the bucket, you want to fill the bucket with something that you enjoy. So people say, okay, I need to go to visit some foreign country to see how they live because it's my bucket list, or I need to experience this because of my bucket list. So what's wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with that? Why are we searching for meaning? So give you a little clue. We started with the book of Ecclesiastes, known in Hebrew as Kohelet, Divrei Kohelet. And what does Kohelet say? Kohelet said, Hakol hevel avalim. Everything is emptiness and void. But we didn't learn the whole context of what King Solomon was saying. Tonight, we're going to look into some more of the words that appear in the book of Kohelet. So I'm going to ask you to look at page 38, and we're going to read it in English, even though actually in Hebrew it rhymes much better. So those that are very familiar with Hebrew, you can read it in Hebrew. I've already read it in Hebrew, so I'm going to read it in English right now. King Solomon says, I amassed great wealth, I built homes, planted vineyards. I designed gardens and orchards filled with every kind of fruit tree. I made reservoirs to water entire groves of trees. I acquired male and female servants. I had more cattle, herds, and flocks than anyone before me in Jerusalem. I piled up silver and gold and the treasures of kings and provinces. I brought in male and female singers and every luxury people can desire, chests of it. I became wealthier than anyone who came before me in Jerusalem, and I still had my wisdom. I didn't hold back from anything my eyes wanted. I didn't deny myself any pleasure. I took joy in everything I achieved, but in the end, the joy was all I really got from it. It was void of meaning. Right? I got joy. Then I looked back at all that I have worked for, everything I had built and gained, and it was all pointless, just chasing the wind. Nothing truly lasting under the sun. So give a look up in the board and you'll see the words that psychologists refer to as a hedonic treadmill. So what does that mean, hedonic treadmill? Because when treadmills first came out and people were running on it, we couldn't understand why. I mean, if you want to run from one place to another place, I understand. You want to run to catch a bus, I understand. But just standing in a stationary place and constantly running, what do you gain from it, right? So, if you know a little bit about fitness, you understand that it's there to keep you healthy. But for someone that doesn't know anything about exercise and they look at it, they think it's actually silly. And I have to say, just on a side note, growing up in our neighborhood in Brooklyn, we walked everywhere. We didn't have a car. So we were constantly doing physical activity. And then one day we saw people jogging. I remember it was in 1970. Suddenly we see people jogging. And we were asking, where are you running? We're just running around the block. Why? What for? Because it was so out of mind that people actually have to run to do exercise when you're walking wherever you go. So the treadmill is the same concept. So now, when someone is constantly pursuing materialism and they're constantly trying to amass more wealth, as we just read what King Solomon just said, and you have to understand, King Solomon was so wealthy that the Talmud says that silver had the same value of stones because there was so much gold that he brought in. He built trade routes. He brought other countries into commerce with them. He had every luxury imaginable in his time. In fact, we also learn, according to the Zohar, that Solomon, King Shlomo, was the 15th generation of Avram Avinu. And the number 15 is very important because the number 15 on the month, when you have a month of 30 days or even 29 days, the 15th of the month is when you have the full moon. What is the meaning of the full moon? So the idea of the full moon, the Zohar says, is kaima siyara bashlemuta. The levana, the moon, the yareach, is filled with the light of the sun, that it's in balance with the sun, and it has so much light that the entire moon is brightened, is so bright that it radiates. So it says that in the time of Solomon, from Avram Avinu, it was the one generation that the Jewish people that are likened to the moon had everything from God. They had health, they had wealth, they had peace, they had tranquility. All the nations of the world came to them. So if you just read what I read, you see what King Solomon is saying. It was not a fiction, it was real. He had everything that you can imagine, everything. And yet, it was all for naught. This is what he says, Havalavanim. It's called not only hedonic treadmill, but it's called hedonic adaptation. What is hedonic adaptation? Let's say someone has a desire to get the latest computer, and they think with this computer they will have all kinds of bliss. They have a computer, they get used to it, and it's fine. What's next? So next they want to get the best car. So they get the best, most luxurious car that you can imagine, and they're driving it. And now what? It's empty. It doesn't lead them anywhere. It's like a hedonic treadmill. You're running and running and running in it, and you think that the next gadget or the next pleasurable activity is what's going to give you fulfillment, and it doesn't. Right? So this is what King Solomon is saying, that he says that it's just chasing wind. And he had everything that he wanted. So what does Solomon do? Solomon says, Shlomo Melech says, maybe happiness is not in the material. Maybe happiness is in something which is beyond the material, and that is the intelligence. So we go to page 40 and we read text 1b. What does Shlomo Melech say? Again, if you read the Hebrew, it's much nicer, but nevertheless, we'll read it in English. I turned my thoughts to understanding wisdom and also madness and foolishness. And I saw that wisdom is better than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness. I just have to stop here a second because this verse is quoted in Hasidic philosophy numerous times. And it says, not only is light better than darkness, but the darkness itself contributes to light. That's why when you light a candle in a room during the day, it doesn't shine as bright as when you light it at night when there's darkness. The darkness itself contributes it. When do you really notice smartness? When you're surrounded by fools. So he saw how much greater wisdom was than foolishness. Now, another thing that he brings out here is the idea of light is a metaphor for wisdom. So I want to stop here for a second. I mentioned earlier, for those that weren't here before in the beginning of the class, that even though this is called the Kabbalah of Wisdom and you haven't yet come to Kabbalah, the Kabbalah starts to come out in the third lesson. That's when you're going to get into the whole Seder Ishtalshalut. There's going to be a lot of Kabbalistic concept, but this is all a preparation. But I'm going to give you one little tidbit, which is not in the text itself, but since we're touching on it, it's a very, very important. So why is light compared to wisdom? Does anyone want to take a stab at it? Because with light you can see where you're going. In other words, the Zohar says something that with wisdom everything becomes clarified. Darkness is distortion. So let's say you go out camping and you set up camp during the day, and then the sun sets and you haven't lit a fire yet, or you haven't turned on your lantern yet. So you know everything is there, but everything is distorted. You can't figure out one thing from the other. So that's a state of darkness, state of confusion. The same thing is true in life. If someone doesn't apply wisdom and study and try to see things for what they really are, it's easy for them to be fooled and have a distorted vision. And this is why we are saying that the period that we're in right now, as the Gemara, the Talmud says that the period just before Mashiach comes, will be the darkest period in history. Why will it be the darkest period in history? There were times that there were worse persecutions. There were times that there was much more murder and much more war. And the Gemara explains, because people will look at light and call light darkness, and people will look at darkness and call it light. That's a total distortion. And that's where we are right now. So what Shlomo Melech is saying, that what wisdom does is wisdom opens up your eyes. So you're able to see, you're no longer confused. Okay? So this is what he says in the next paragraph. A wise person sees where they're going, but a fool stumbles in the dark. However, you would think that with all that wisdom, he would be so delighted and happy. And we know that Shlomo Melech was the wisest of all men. That's what it says. It says that after his father died, King David died, the prophet came to him and said that God wants to bless you with wealth or wisdom. Which one do you choose? And he said, I choose wisdom, because if I have wisdom, I have everything. So he was the wisest of all people, right? So yet he says, but I also realize that the same fate awaits them both. In other words, those that are involved in materialism and those that are involved in wisdom. So I thought, if I'll end up just like the fool, what's the point of being wise? And I saw this too as meaningless. because neither the wise nor the foolish are remembered for long. In time, both are forgotten. And in the end, the wise person dies just like the fool. That made me hate life. Everything, happiness under the sun seemed so pointless, just chasing the wind. Now remember, who's the one that said it? King Solomon. Let's give a look on the board. What was the greatness of King Solomon? He was king from 863, 797 BCE. He brought unprecedented peace to the land of Israel. He fortified the infrastructure, trade, and military of the land of Israel. He built a navy that was unbelievable because that was the main part of the military. He composed thousands of proverbs of songs, and ultimately he constructed the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the most desirable place in the world, the holiest place in Israel. And yet, he says that even with all the wisdom, it was nothing. Now, wait a second. Last week, we spent a whole lesson speaking about meaning and how meaning makes everything meaningful in life. And we brought the example of the tree. Didn't Solomon knew all that? And yet, even though he knew all that, nevertheless, he comes with this very negative conclusion. Let's give a look how Nachmanides translates it. Nachmanides was the great explainer of Torah wisdom. He came after the Rambam and after Rashi. Nachmanides was one of the most illustrious personalities in the Middle Ages who actually saved Spanish Jewry. Very, very, and he moved to Israel and he built a lot in Israel in his day. So what does he write? Page 42, text 2. Futility of futilities, said Kohelet. Futility of futilities is all futile. If another person has said it, we would have said, they never amassed 2 coins in their life, yet they speak about the wealth of the world and declare it futility. They couldn't put 2 cents together, but if they put 2 cents together and they really worked and they really made something, they would have found meaning. But you can't say that about Solomon. But Solomon, who's written, the king made silver in Jerusalem as abundant as stones, is indeed suited to render all as futility of futilities. Behold, Solomon the ruler, the powerful one, the wise, authored this entire book to render the whole world as meaningless and to tell us that everything is utterly futile. So how does this jive with what we learned last week? So here is where I'm going to come and show you a revolutionary idea which runs a little contrary to what we studied last week. And if you remember, again, I remind you that right at the beginning of the class last week, I said that the first 2 lessons of this course is really one long lesson, but it would have taken us 3 hours, so we split it into 2. So it's a continuum of what we learned last week. So let us talk about this, and we will see that meaning is not everything. Meaning definitely adds spice to life, but there is something about meaning that's not enough. And one of the writings actually comes from a very well-known novelist from Russia. His name was Leo Tolstoy. I'm sure you all heard of Leo Tolstoy. And he wrote a lot of books. His most famous books became the novels like War and Peace and the book Anna Karenina. Those are the most 2 famous books that he wrote. It's still studied today as literature. But then he wrote a work in 1882, which was like a confession. And one of the things that he writes there in this confession is found on text 3. And it's very important that we look at this, what he's writing, because here he was a very accomplished writer. He was an accomplished novelist. He had money. He had a wife. He had family. He had property. He could do whatever he wanted. He was one of the most respected people in Tsarist Russia. And yet, there came a point where he was very depressed. Let's see what he writes. Page 43. 5 years ago, something very strange happened to me. At first, I experienced moments of perplexity and arrest of life, as though I did not know what to do or how to live, and I felt lost and became dejected. But this passed, and I went on living as before. Then these moments of perplexity began to recur more often and more often, and always in the same form. They were always expressed by the question, what is it for? What does it lead to? I understood that it was no casual indisposition, but something very important. And if these questions constantly repeated themselves, they would need to be answered. And I tried to answer them. The questions seemed so stupid, simple, childish questions. But as soon as I touched them and tried to solve them, I at once became convinced that number one, they are not childish and stupid, but the most important and profound of life's questions. And two, that try as I would, I cannot solve them. Before occupying myself with Samara, my Samara estate, Samara, as you know, is a big city in southwest Russia. We actually have people in Charlotte that come from Samara. Not going to mention their names, but many of you know them. The education of my son or the writing of a book, I had to know why I was doing it. As long as I did not know why, I could do nothing. I could not live. Amid the thoughts of the estate management, which greatly occupied me at the time, the question would always occur to me, well, you have 6,000 destiatinas of land in the Samara government with 300 horses, and what next? I was quite disconcerted and did not know what to think. Or when considering my plans for the education of my children, I would say to myself, what for? Or when thinking of the fame my works would bring me, I would say to myself, very well, you will be more famous than Gogol or Pushkin or Shakespeare or Molière, or than all the writers in the world. And what of it? I could find no reply at all. It came to a point where he was seriously contemplating suicide. And they say that he actually wrote a suicide note. And then he said, imagine you're working all day on a field, and what you have to do is carry bricks from one side to the other side. And all day, that's all you do. You carry the bricks from one side to the other side. So instead of building with the bricks, that's all you're doing. And he felt that that was his life. And so he had meaning in his life because he was a great writer, but yet he felt the void. So the question is, what was missing? We discussed last week that meaning is all about growth, productivity, giving, and relationships. So what is missing that meaning itself cannot supply? So I'm going to throw out, that must be the door outside. I'm going to throw out a heretical question. What do you think I would answer if someone would come to me and say, Rabbi, do I need Judaism to lead a meaningful life? What do you think I would answer? Those that know me and those that will know me. What do you think I would answer?
No.
Does everyone agree? That is correct. You don't need Judaism to find a meaningful life. You could find a meaningful life in many, many other ways. Why? Because meaning is subjective. For some person, meaning means to acquire a lot of knowledge. To another person, it's to protect the environment. For another person, it might be to help people. People can find meaning in so many different ways. It doesn't mean that Judaism doesn't have meaning. Judaism has a tremendous amount of meaning. It has a world of meaning. But what we're saying is that it's not there to give you meaning. Even though it teaches us how to have meaning, but it's not there. Because theoretically, someone can stumble on some other ideas and find meaning with that. And I cannot say it's not wrong. And there are people that study Judaism and it gives them meaning. Just like we said before, wisdom gives us light and we know how to go. We know how to go forward. The reason that all of this leaves us empty, and it's not Judaism that is what's there to give us meaning, is because there's one more important question. And in order to get that important question, we're going to go back to the Purim story. One slice of the Purim story, and it's a dialogue between Mordechai and Esther. So what's the Purim story, just to refresh our memories? Around the year 350 BCE, the king of Persia, his name was Ahasuerus, makes a party, and he asks his wife, Queen Vashti to appear in an inappropriate way in front of all the people to show off her beauty. And she came from royalty and he came from non-royalty. And she didn't like that. So she was dismissive of him and he was very embarrassed. And of course, he turned to his 7 advisors and they told him that he has to eliminate her. So he killed her. Now that he had no queen, he wanted to find a new queen. We know this whole story, and he lined up all the potential candidates. And who is the one that he chooses? The most unlikely of all, and that was the girl known Esther. Her real name was Hadassah. Esther was her hidden name. Mordechai, who was her uncle, some say her cousin, but the most traditional viewpoint is that he is her uncle, tells her to hide her identity. Why does he tell her to hide her identity? In today's time, we don't need to even answer that question. Because if she did something wrong, the king would not only blame her, but would blame all of the Jewish people. So she kept her identity hidden. And in fact, she had 7 maiden servants. And each maiden had a name after a day of the week. The first one was Sunday, the next one was Monday. The reason for that is that she should always remember and never get confused when Shabbat was. She didn't have a cell phone that she can pull out and see, oh, what's today's date? She actually used that. She also, one of the reasons that we eat hamantashen with poppy seeds is because, as you know, poppy grows in that part of the world. And she knew that that would be kosher, and she kept a kosher diet. Now, the prime minister of Persia was none other than the evil Haman. And he hated the Jews. He was a Amalekite, and he wanted to kill all the Jews. So he went to the king, offered a huge sum of money, was 10,000 silver pieces, and said, I'd like to kill all the Jews in your empire, your 127 countries. The king was more than happy to do so. And he sent out letters to all the governors and all the provinces under his rulership and said that on this and this day, you need to kill the Jews on the 13th of Adar. Mordechai, who was working in the palace, was working as one of the ministers, found out about it. What did he do? He put on sack and cloth and ashes, and he was crying, gathered Jewish children to learn. Esther did not know anything of it because she didn't mix into governmental affairs. But she heard that her uncle was sitting at the gates of the palace outside in sackcloth and crying. So she sent one of her trusted servants, his name was Hatach, and she said, Hatach, find out what's going on. So Mordechai pulled out the letter that the king sent, and he said, show it to Esther, that she should go to the king and ask the king for her people. So we're going to pick up from Mordechai's message from the scroll of Esther and see what we're going to learn from here that's going to actually open up our eyes in our pursuit of what is important in life. So, page 46. Mordechai gave Hatach a copy of the written decree that had been circulated in Shushan, instructing him to show it to Esther and to urge her to go before the king, to plead with him and beg for the lives of her people. Hatach went and delivered Mordechai's message to Esther. Esther then said to Hatach and instructed him to relay her words to Mordechai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that anyone, man or woman, who enters the king's inner court without being summoned is subject to death, unless the king extends his golden scepter, granting him permission to live. And I have not been summoned to the king in 30 days. Esther's message was conveyed to Mordechai. So what was Esther saying to Mordechai? What makes you think that I have the ability to go intervene on behalf of the Jewish people when I wasn't called? And not only why I wasn't called, but if I wasn't invited and I go and the king is in a bad mood and he decides not to lift his golden scepter, I'm cooked goose. Forget it. So what do you think is going on? So how did Mordechai reply to that? Mordechai sent back his reply to Esther, and he says, don't imagine that you of all Jews will escape just because you're in the palace. If you remain silent at this moment, Relief and deliverance will come for the Jews from another source, but you and your house will perish. So what is Mordecai saying to her? You know what? You're also going to suffer the persecution once you're discovered as a Jew. And on the contrary, if you think that you're going to be able to be shielded in the palace, that's not necessarily so. In fact, your fate might be worse than all the Jews, because I'm a true believer that God is not going to forsake the Jewish people. But you had this opportunity, so then you should use it. Okay. But Mordecai doesn't finish with that. Then he adds another verse. And the other verse is something entirely different, as we're going to explore. So here Mordecai is appealing to her that giving her reason, giving her meaning why she needs to go to the king, because she's not going to be able to save herself. She has the opportunity to save all the people. Let her do it. What does Mordecai say after that? And suddenly Mordecai throws out another statement. Text 4b. Which means, and who knows, perhaps you became queen just for a time like this. So what's the difference between the first argument and the second argument? So let's talk about this. You're right, but I'm going to put it into words on the board. In the first one, it's subjective. It'll be beneficial to you. You'll save yourself. Not only will you save the people, but you're going to save yourself as well. In the second one, it's not about you. It's about your mission. It's not about whether you're going to benefit from it or not. Perhaps this is your purpose. And what I want us to look now is on two different words, which is going to be the whole subject, the way we go further. There's a concept which is called meaning, and could be deep meaning. And then there's a concept which is called purpose. And the difference between meaning and purpose is meaning is subjective and purpose is objective. And that's a world of difference as we're going to see it. Mordecai didn't try to guilt her and say, how could you live with yourself? He first used the argument of meaning, but then he added on top of it something which is much higher than that. And what's much higher than that is the purpose. And very interestingly, Esther caught on to it. And how do we know that? Of Esther's response. Give a look at text 4c. How did Esther respond? Esther says to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews found in Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat, do not drink for 3 days, night and day. And I too, along with my maidens, will fast likewise. And then I will go to the king, though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. What is the meaning? Kasher avadati avadati. If I perish, I perish. She no longer looked at it as meaning. It wasn't the meaningful thing for her to do, to intervene on behalf of the Jews, and she's going to get a high of it. She wasn't thinking in those terms. She accepted Mordecai's second argument, purpose. Mordecai was saying to her, where does it come that a Jewish girl in Persia should be chosen out of all the hundreds of thousands of candidates that presented themselves to the king, and she should be the one chosen to be the queen? It doesn't make logical sense. And not only that, according to the Talmud, she was older than most of them, and she wasn't as pretty as most of them, and yet she was chosen. And the answer is, this was what's called Hashgacha Pratit. This was the divine orchestration that God did. God knew that there is a Haman, and God knew that Haman is going to concoct an evil plan against the Jewish people. And he said, I will show them how they're going to save themselves. That I'm going to orchestrate in such a way that Vashti is going to disobey her husband, and he's going to fly into a fury. He's going to seek the advice of his advisors. They'll kill her. Then she'll come into position, and now she has the choice whether she fulfills her purpose or not. Now, the idea of subjective and objective is very, very important, because subjective is a mindset where we're looking for ourselves. I need meaning. So to give you an example, it says in the different levels of one understanding their relationship with God and understanding why they were created. So you find some of the great leaders, even the founders of Judaism, would say, okay, God created a world, God created me, I'm here, now I need to know, well, what's the meaning of my life? So that is very subjective because I don't doubt myself and I don't doubt my existence. I just want to find meaning for it. And whatever suits my fancy that will give me meaning is meaning. So it could be Torah. It could be a good piece of Torah that I'm studying or a good mitzvah that gives me meaning. It could be a Shabbat meal. It could be a good relationship. Now I feel holy and elevated. It's all fine and good. But that's all subjective because it's the way you interpret it. A lot of people, to them, Judaism is all how much it resonates with them. I like this, therefore I observe it and it makes sense to me. Kabbalah is something that I like, so I'll study Kabbalah, which is fine, but that's all subjective. But then there is the objective way. The objective way is asking not if I'm here, but why am I here? If I'm here, there must be a meaning for it. Give a look on page 48. If you're looking at the box that says meaning, the sequence is the following. I happen to exist. Let me live a meaningful life. Then the value is arbitrary. We can find anything that'll give meaning. Some people will find Judaism. Some people will find playing hockey, or some people will find fighting for the environment. All of that gives them meaning. And a lot of people find meaning in their mission. One person that I know was in a business and she decided to quit a business, and now she is saving cats and dogs and bringing them to the shelter, strays. That's her meaning. She found the meaning in life, which is fine. Purpose is totally different. Purpose, God needs something, and that's why he brought me to the world. And there must be a real reason why I'm here. So this is no longer subjective. And not only is it's not arbitrary, it's inherent. It's the idea of purpose. So the difference between purpose and meaning is meaning could be anything. And it could give you a rich life, but it'll still leave you empty. Proof to that is King Solomon. Purpose is something else entirely. Let's go back to the first exercise that we did. Okay? So remember, we asked you what this is, and somebody online said that this is a nutcracker, the one on the right, the one on the left, maybe a ring holder. Now, I'm going to reveal to you that actually the one on the right is a cherry pitter.
Ah, okay.
You got it? It was an old-fashioned cherry pitter that when you take the pits out, you would use that as a pitter. But you want to know what the thing on the left is?
Yes.
The writer of this course, Rabbi Silverberg, went on to AI and he said, find me something that has no meaning whatsoever, but it looks like something. And it gave him a few options and he chose this option and there he has it. Now, is it useless? Absolutely not. You can use it as a ring holder. You can use it for whatever you want. But that's subjective. It's whatever you want. It wasn't created with a purpose. It was created randomly. So what? Yeah. Whatever fits your fancy. Look, the point of the matter is,
Wait.
Oh, wait.
I'm just going to 1 second. I'm sorry, you can unmute yourself when you need to. We'll look at it soon. So what are we trying to say over here? This is a mind shift because the mind shift is that we can't look at the world as someplace random. We're still going to read a very interesting reading from Rabbi Cook. But before we get there, I want to read something from Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs. And by the way, those that are familiar with him know that today, the 20th of Cheshvan, was his 5th yortzeit, and they were celebrating it around the world. There are a lot of other things that happen on this day, but right now, since we're quoting him, we're just going to mention that. So this will be a merit to his soul that we're reading his text. So he writes on page 49, think about it. Every function that was once performed by religion can now be done by something else. In other words, if you want to explain the world, you don't need Genesis, you have science. If you want to control the world, you don't need prayer, you have technology. If you want to prosper, you don't necessarily ask God blessings, you have the global economy. You want to control power, you no longer need prophets, you need liberal democracy and elections. If you're ill, you don't need a priest, you can go to a doctor. If you feel guilty, you don't need to confess, you can go to a psychotherapist instead. If you're depressed and you don't need faith, you can take a pill. If you still need salvation, you can go to today's cathedrals, which is the shopping centers of Britain. Remember, he was the chief rabbi of Great Britain. Or as one American writes them, weapons of mass consumption. Religion seems superfluous, redundant, de trop. Why then does it survive? That's a question. What is the famous statement that Karl Marx said? Religion is the opium of the masses, right? Because that's what they saw it. They saw it as a way to give meaning, but we can find other meaning. So that's exactly what we're trying to say. If Judaism is only about giving you meaning, you can find meaning in many other things. My answer is simple. Religion survives because it answers 3 questions that every reflective person must ask. Question number 1 is, who am I? Question number 2 is, why am I here? And question number 3 is, how shall I live? What is the meaning of this? This is such revolutionary ideas because it runs so contrary to our Western culture. In the Western culture, everything is about options. Everything is about free choice. So if you want to live a religious life, it's freedom of choice. That's why in our country, there's the concept of religious freedom. If I want to say a contrarian opinion, I have the freedom to say that. And we cherish that. We actually idealize the idea of freedom. What we're saying over here is, it's not about freedom or not, because we still have the freedom of choice. We're saying that our relationship to God has nothing to do with giving us meaning, or it's not an option. We see it in a totally different way. We see it, if I'm here, that means God put me here for a mission, and he's expecting something from me. And I have to ask myself the question, what is my mission, and am I fulfilling it? So it's not about how I enjoy it. There's a reading from the previous Rebbe that's in the appendix, which you can read later, that there was a man that was a businessman, and he was living in a very, very large city where there were a lot of schools and synagogues. This was in the time of the 4th Chabad Rebbe. And he had a job opportunity in another city. So he went to the Rebbe and asked him if he should take it. He said, I'll give you a blessing. And he came back once for a visit. So he said, so what's your city like? He said, my city is a small community. Everybody there is ignorant. They don't know how to read Hebrew. They can just answer Amen when I say Kaddish. And I have to read the Torah because nobody else knows how to read the Torah. He says, what about your studies? He says, because I'm so busy preparing the Torah reading, I only have an hour a day. He says, so what are you doing in the city? He says, what do you mean? I got a job and I'm successful there. And not only that, he says, you, Rebbe, have given me a blessing to go there. He says, did I give you the blessing just that you should be able to get a bigger paycheck? Was that what my idea was? Or was my idea that you have to be there to wake everybody up and give them the knowledge and give them the information and be engaged in the community? Just that you should get a better job, I would never have said a blessing that you should go to another community. But you have a mission there. I saw that your soul is connected to that community and you could awaken the people there. So it's a whole different way of seeing things. It's not what is in it for me, because that's very subjective. Then Judaism is no different than that random piece that AI created, that you can do anything you want with it. The truth of the matter is that I have a mission and I was created for that. And every day a person has to question himself, what is my mission? What does God expect from me? There was a great chief rabbi in Israel by the name of Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook. He came originally from Russia, and then he became the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, then the chief rabbi of Israel. He passed away in 1935. He was a great philosopher as well. He was one of the greatest leaders pre the modern state of Israel. Give a look what he writes. You can read it in Hebrew or in English, page 50. Before I was created, during all the limitless time that came before, there was nothing in the world that required me. Had I been needed for any purpose or task, I would have existed earlier. The fact that I wasn't created until that specific moment is proof that there was no need for me until then. My existence was not necessary until it was. And when the time came, I was brought into this world to fulfill a role, to contribute something essential to the perfection of existence. Shlichut, nachon. The shlichut is a mission. Shlichut is Hebrew for mission. Everybody has a mission. And not only that, it's inherently purposeful. And that is the Jewish approach. Judaism doesn't ask the question, what's the meaning of life? You can answer that with all of your research. The question that we ask is, what's my purpose? I don't ask, what do I find meaningful? When we would go to the Rebbe, we wouldn't ask the Rebbe, what's meaningful in life? We wouldn't dare even ask such a question. We would say, what's my purpose? What am I here for? What do you need me to do? What does God need me to do?
Does that start when you're a child? Is it a way? I think it does.
It starts, it depends how you're raised. And definitely, the Jewish approach is, what is my purpose? It definitely starts that way. I'm not saying even people that are immersed in that get it. I still see a lot of people still thinking about, what do I get out of this? What will I enjoy more? What subjects that I study? But not looking at it in the sense that there is a need. And when the problem is that, I would say this. I'm going to stop for a second because they mentioned Russia before, and I'm going to use this as an example. In 1964, my family attended a bar mitzvah in Queens. And it was a very nice bar mitzvah, but we weren't in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. When we came back, the next Sunday morning, all my friends in school were saying, did you miss a Farbrengen? Wow, the Rebbe spoke. One of the things that the Rebbe said at that Farbrengen, it's actually printed, was he's looking around this big synagogue and he sees people that lived in the former Soviet Union. And when they were there, they were the fighters to keep the flame of Judaism alive and to the point of self-sacrifice. And they finally came out and they came to America and they got involved in business. And what is their desire now? To have a Hollywood kitchen, to have a wall-to-wall carpet. All of a sudden, because it's easily accessible to them, Judaism, they don't have to fight for it anymore. Which means to say that even when they were doing it, even though they deserve a lot of credit, they were doing it because they were challenged. But they were challenged because of something external. But it wasn't something like they said, this is my purpose. So it was full of meaning. Then you take someone like Reb Mendel Futerfas. Reb Mendel Futerfas also was in the Soviet Union. And he paid the price by being arrested and serving time in Siberia and all of that. And he was always about the mission. And we have a story about him that I will tell in a minute. But even when he came out and he came to Britain and then eventually to Israel, he was always thinking about what his mission was. I'll give you an example. When he came to Israel, he noticed that a lot of the new immigrants that came from the former Soviet Union, there were those that came from Georgia, which was called Gruzia, and there were those that were coming from Bukhara. And the families of Gruzia were very close to their children. The families in Bukhara believed that the children have to be out of the house at 5 years old. They have to be independent. So he could not tolerate it. So he went and raised money And he built these bungalows in Kfar Chabad where he actually housed these kids and started a school for them. And he hired teachers. He was already an old man, but he never sat still. There was always something that he could do. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I have to do something. Not because he wanted to satisfy himself. He had a very, very hard life, and he suffered all the years. But his, as we're soon going to see a story about him, it was always focused on the mission. So let's give a look at the difference between meaning and purpose. If you give a look on page 51, figure 2.2, meaning, with me, I'm looking for something meaningful and determine what meaningful is. It ends with me. Success is determined by whether or not I found it to be meaningful. When it comes to purpose, before me is the reason I'm here in general or any given situation. What is it for? Success is determined by whether or not the need was filled. So it's not about me, it's about the mission. And this is where we talk about psychology. And I've actually practiced it, and I met with physicians that deal with psychology, or some that are holistic. And I said, many people are looking for meaning in life. They're looking for something meaningful that they want to feel. If they do something meaningful, their self-esteem grows. And I said, that's a mistake. The only thing that'll give a person meaning, that'll give a person self-esteem, is purpose. If you have a purpose in life, and you know that that is your mission, and you fulfill it, then you have self-esteem. Not because you're the greatest at it, but you know you're doing what's the right thing you have to do. There's a story told about a disciple of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. He was a very wealthy man. He was very charitable. And he made a lot of promises to help people, especially families that had daughters that had to get married. And unfortunately, he suffered great reversals, and he lost all of his money. And he was totally distraught because he had made pledges and he couldn't keep the pledges. He had to marry his daughters. He couldn't keep the daughters, couldn't get them married. He was beside himself. So let's see the way the story is written by the previous Rebbe, page 52, text 7. So this man who lost all of his money traveled to the Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, and poured out his heart with many tears and deep anguish. If God has seen fit to afflict me with poverty, I accept the judgment, he said. But how can I, God forbid, remain in debt and fail to repay? How can I not fulfill the promise I made to my family and relatives? And my daughter's weddings, I made those promises back when I was wealthy. According to our holy Torah, I had every right to make the commitments. If I now fail to keep them, it'll be a desecration of God's name. He cried bitterly over the great punishment that he was being made to endure. With great emotion, he begged the Rebbe to arouse abundant mercy in his behalf from the sources of true compassion and kindness, so that he might repay his debts and fulfill his promises. After that, he said, I'll accept whatever poverty heaven has decreed upon me. He ended with his words, Rebbe, I need to repay all my debts. I need to give my relatives and family members what I promised them. I need to provide for the weddings of my 2 daughters I promised them. The Rebbe was leaning on his holy arms in deep spiritual absorption, listening to the man's cries and pleas. After some time, the Rebbe lifted his holy head and, still absorbed in that intense spiritual state, said, You speak about what you need, but you say nothing about why you're needed. The man heard it, and he fainted. He didn't faint because he felt that his prayers weren't answered. He suddenly realized that he was so focused on himself and what he needs and what he needs and what he needs, he never spoke once what Hashem needs from him. So much so that they had to bring in people to revive him and take him out. When he came to, he just said, that's it. I'm forgetting about everything. I'm going to immerse myself in what I need to do, Torah study and anything else. And he became so positive and joyous, he forgot about all of his misery. A few days later, he was called to go into the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe said, now that you're realizing that it's not about you, but it's about your mission, you're deserving of the blessing. And I bless you that all of your wealth should be restored and you'll be able to fulfill all your commitments. And that's exactly what happened. What is the meaning over here? The man was a great Torah scholar and he was very charitable, but it was all about giving him meaning. It was all about him being able to live up to what he expected from himself. It wasn't never the thought about maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe that's why God gave me the wealth. Someone could be wealthy and he says, okay, I have all this money. What do I need to do with this money? Let me look for a purpose. But that's someone that's looking for meaning. If someone is focused on purpose, they're never going to ask that question. They're going to say, I have the money. It means that there's a purpose for it. Let me go do it. And realizes that it's not there just to find meaning. I want to bring the story of Rab Mendel Futerfas. It's not in print, but it's something that we talked a lot about, and it's connected here as well. Rab Mendel Futerfas only spoke, he never wrote a book about his life, he never wrote a biography. But at one point, the Rebbe chose him to be the main influencer in the Chabad yeshiva in Israel and Kfar Chabad. And he so felt that it wasn't something that he was groomed for, but if the Rebbe said he has to do it, he accepted it. So every Shabbat morning, he would daven very long, he would pray very long, and then he would finish like about 2, 3 o'clock. And it was amazing to watch him daven. It's a man that had a lot of suffering in his life, and he would pray with such sweetness. And then he would come into the study hall, and we would have some chalot for him and some olive oil. He would dip his challah in shemen zayit, in olive oil, and he would take a little vodka because the doctors told him he's not allowed to drink. He had stomach ulcers, and he figured out that if he dips the challah in olive oil, it actually coats it, and it's good because he would never give that up. And he would start talking to us, and that's when he would reveal his stories about himself. And he told us tons of stories of what he experienced. And one of the stories he says was that he was arrested in 1945 by the Soviets. He was actually trying to escape, and he had just finished transporting a lot of people out of the Soviet Union to freedom. His wife was out, his kids were out, but he felt he had one more duty, one more thing he can do until they caught up with him. And they sentenced him to 10 years of hard labor. So he was sent to Siberia under the most awful conditions. And he suffered a tremendous amount, but he was always in a joyous mood. In those rare cases when a pasilka would actually come to him, you know what a pasilka is? It's a package. When he would get a package from from home, so they would come and give it to him, and they would steal a lot of it, but then he would share it with everybody. Now, who were his mates, natural mates in prison? The intelligentsia, the architects, the physicians, the scientists, and they would engage after a hard day's work. They would sit on the floor and they would talk. But he would always make them feel happy, always. Well, one day, as they were sitting there and talking, they turned to him, and they weren't necessarily Jewish, but they were men of great qualities. And they said to him, Mendel, why are you so jolly? Why are you so happy? You're in this miserable place where your life can be snuffed out in a second, and you're mistreated in a terrible way, and we're starving and beaten, and we work long hours. How could you be happy? So he turns to them and he says, I have a question to you. Why are you unhappy? They look at him, what do you mean, why are you unhappy? They're in this terrible place. He says, no. Besides being in the terrible place, he turns to one, he says, you're a great surgeon, right? And now you can't do any surgery. Your whole life was built around your career. You're a great doctor. You're a great architect. You're a great scientist. Everybody's career has been taken away, and they have no meaning. He says, I was born to serve God. And I can serve God anywhere. I can serve God here. I can serve God anywhere. And I find ways how to serve Hashem. So why shouldn't I be happy? In fact, one time, he felt that he had to purify himself. And the way we purify ourselves is go to a mikveh. And he was working on the deck of a ship that they were fixing. And all of a sudden, he stumbled and he fell into the water. It was a deep dive, and everybody came to save him. And he was smiling. They asked him, why are you smiling? He says, I wanted to go to the mikveh for such a long time. I finally had the opportunity. I shouldn't be happy. He saw in everything, like the story with the tightrope walker, how he was able to see focus, what focus does. Everything for him was a lesson. So the point of the matter is that he never looked for meaning in life. And he once cried to us and he said, I never had meaning in life. I never had. He had 10 children and 8 of them were killed by the Nazis, right? And he only came out with 2. Yet he was a happy man. Why was he happy? Because he was focused on mission. He wasn't focused on looking for meaning and saying, oh, if I get this job or I get that, it'll make me happy. So this is sort of in short what it means. Now, how do we gain that? So we're going to read another reading from Rabbi Sachs, if you go to text 8. Before that, I just want to mention that they say in the name of Mark Twain that the 2 most important days in our life are what? The day we were born and the day you find out why. Because he was touching on that everybody has a mission. Now, purpose can't be discovered from inside. It has to come from the outside. And he gives an example. Now, this is an example that goes right over my head. I don't understand it because it's a sport example. But hopefully everybody in this room has some sort of connection to sports, or everybody listening online has a connection to sports. So you might be able to relate to it. One other thing that you have to realize is that he's speaking in the Queen's English, and he was in Britain, and in Britain, football is what we call here soccer. Okay, just to remember that. So he says, take a game like football. Some hypothetical visitor from a land to which football is not yet penetrate wants to understand the strange ritual which excites so much passion. You explain the rules of the game, what counts as a foul, what constitutes a goal, and so on. Fine, says the visitor, I now understand the game. What I don't understand is why you get so excited about it. Here, you might have to launch into some larger reflection about games as a ritualized conflict and the role of play in rehearsing skills needed in actual conflict. You might even suggest that ritualized conflict reduces the need for actual conflict. And by the way, one of the great rabbis pre-World War II said we have to thank God for giving us sports because otherwise they would go around killing Jews. But nevertheless, this was in Europe before the Holocaust. The football pitch, which is the football field, as a substitute for the battlefield. There's an internal logic of system, the rules of football, but the meaning of the system lies elsewhere. It can only be understood through some sense of the wider human context in which it is set. To do this, you have to step outside the system and see why it was brought into being. There's no way of understanding the meaning of football by merely knowing its rules. They tell you how to play the game, but not why people do so, and why they invest in its passion, with the passion they do. The internal workings of a system do not explain the place the system holds in human lives. The meaning of system lies outside the system. Therefore, the meaning of the universe lies outside the universe. Only something or someone outside the universe can give meaning to the universe. Going back to Leo Tolstoy, you know what saved him from suicide? He discovered God. And once he started to study God and the Bible, it gave him a whole new perspective on life. And he said, now I understand that it's not in vain, right? And we're going to see the same thing between Solomon in a minute. Now, there is a video, which, again,
Life has meaning.
Noted. Moving along. What's that circle?
Take a guess.
A sun? That's it?
Wrong.
Maybe a person?
here we're getting to the point that leads us to Torah. So if you're going to ask, do you need Judaism to have meaning? The answer is no. Do you need Judaism to have purpose? The answer is absolutely yes. Because without Judaism, without the Torah, you don't know what the purpose is. Then you're like that little girl guessing what the circle is. Now, Torah, there's a very strange statement in the Midrash about the Torah, and I would like to build on that. And actually, for Chabad boys that have a bar mitzvah, they mention this statement in every discourse, every time they recite the discourse. And it says the following, page 56. The Torah's existence precedes the world by 2,000 years. What is the meaning of that? Actually, it doesn't make sense at all. It's a contradiction in term, because time itself is a creation. And when you say the creation of the world, that's when time was created. So how can you say Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years? So you have to come to understand that when it's talking about years, it's talking about cycles. It's not talking about years. And it's not talking about time. It's talking about that the Torah came way before the world. The only reason that the world is there is because of the Torah. What does it mean because of the Torah? Actually, Rashi mentions it right at the beginning of Genesis of Bereshit. He asked the question, why is the first letter of the Torah a bet? Now, there are many answers to it, and they're probably all correct. But the numeric value of bet is 2. And it says for 2 purposes. Bishvil HaTorah or Bishvil Yisrael. It says the Torah was created, the world was created for the sake of Torah and for the sake of Israel, to keep the Torah. Which means that the Torah came first, and now in order for the Torah to be actualized, you need a world. Now, if you think of it that way, it's exactly what the idea of purpose is. It's not there's a world, and then God decided, okay, you want to have meaning in the world, I'll bring you Torah. Then Torah came after the world. Let's say someone is having a baby, a couple is having their first baby, and they're setting up a baby room. And they buy baby furniture, right? Even though in Jewish tradition it's not usually done, but some people do that. So they buy all the baby furniture, and when the baby comes, the baby is ready to be brought into the baby room. So if you ask someone what came first, the baby or the baby furniture, what would be your answer? The baby came first, because the only reason you bought the furniture is for the sake of the baby. If there was no baby, you wouldn't buy the furniture. The same thing is true not only with a baby, the same thing is true that if you want to start a business and you need to have a house, and the house is the only place that you can do the business, so even though you didn't start the business and you bought the house first, you did it for the sake of the business. The same thing is true with the Torah. The Torah came before. God says, in order for the Torah to be actualized, I have to create heaven, I have to create earth, I have to create people, I have to create all these items, and it is in order to fulfill the Torah. So this is a total paradigm shift. Instead of saying that the Torah is giving us meaning in life, and without Torah we have no meaning in life, it's the opposite. Without Torah there wouldn't be life. The only reason that there's life, and the only reason that there is energy, and the only reason that there's people, and the only reason that there's heaven and earth is because of Torah, which means to say that I need to figure out what is the purpose. What is the purpose? It's not what the meaning is, it's what's the purpose. And this brings us to a very interesting story that the Talmud tells us about the great Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva lived in a time when the Romans prohibited the study of Torah, right? And Rabbi Akiva couldn't stop himself from teaching Torah. So he assembled people in Israel and they taught Torah. This is actually engraved on his tombstone. If you ever go to the city of Tiberia is Tiberias, and you go up the mountain, not far from where Maimonides' resting place is, go up a circular highway, a road, takes you all the way up, and you overlook the Kinneret, which is the Sea of Galilee, and you will see Rabbi Akiva's resting place. This whole story that we're reading here is from the Talmud, and it's actually engraved in Hebrew on his tombstone. What does it say? Once the wicked Roman government issued a decree forbidding Jews from studying Torah. We're not going into why they did it, because they felt that it's the only way that they can control the population. Rabbi Akiva, Papas ben Yehuda came upon Rabbi Akiva, was publicly gathering groups and teaching Torah. He said to him, Akiva, aren't you afraid of the authorities? Rabbi Akiva replied and said, let me tell you a parable. A fox was walking along a river and saw a fish darting back and forth. He said to the fish, why are you fleeing? They answered, from the nets that people have cast for us. Said the fox, why don't you come upon dry land and live with me, just as your ancestors lived with mine? The fish said to him, are you the one that they call the cleverest of animals? Like sly as a fox? Yeah. You're not clever, you're foolish. If we're in danger even here, in the place that gives us life, how much more so if we leave it for a place that can't survive? The same is true for us, Rabbi Akiva concluded. If we're at risk even while studying Torah, the source of our life, as it says, for it is your life and the length of your days, how much worse would it be if we were abandoning it? So what is the story of Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva is saying that if the whole purpose of studying Torah is to give us meaning, and that's how we sustain life, so studying Torah is not sustainable, because it's going to destroy our life, right? So let's find another thing that gives us meaning. But that's not what Rabbi Akiva said. What Rabbi Akiva said is, studying Torah is not about giving us meaning. Studying the Torah is our purpose, which is the oxygen for the world. This is why we were created. We were created to study Torah. You can't go to a fish and say, the fish will say, okay, water is an option for me where I can find the light. Fish has no other option. Its creation was that the oxygen source is only in the water. Similarly, even though Torah brings wealth, relationships, wisdom, legacy, and spirituality, but that's not what it's about. What it's about is trying to find our purpose. And we haven't found our purpose yet. For that, you'll have to come to the next class when we start with the Kabbalistic terms. But what we're learning is something which is very interesting, the attitude that we have towards Judaism. And this is something which is actually very, very difficult to break in the West, because in the West, it's all about us finding meaning and us finding satisfaction. I remember when, after 10 years of living here in Charlotte, the head of one of the Jewish organizations came to my wife and asked her, so are you happy living in Charlotte? And she looked at her and she says, I don't understand your question. So are you happy? Are you satisfied? She says, I never came here to be happy. We came here for a mission. You can ask me, do you feel that you're succeeding in the mission or not succeeding in the mission? It's not about our happiness, because life is not about happiness. Happiness comes when you find purpose. When you fulfill your purpose and you realize that your purpose is successful, then you feel fulfilled. It's much more than meaning. And it also gives us a whole different attitude in Judaism. Why are Jews so devout to Judaism to the point of self-sacrifice? Because if it's only about meaning, it could easily be replaced. And as King Solomon, who had all the meaning in the world, he had everything he wanted. And what was his conclusion? Hevel havolim. It's all for naught, until he comes to the very end. And what is the very end? He said, even though I tried all of these delights and everything that I can imagine, and believe me, he was capable of doing it. Whether he did it or not, he was definitely capable of doing it. And he had armies and armies and armies of people ready to serve him, to do anything that he wanted. You read the stories of King Solomon, it's baffling. And yet, what did he write at the end? We actually say it every day if we eat bread before Birchat HaMazon. I'll say it first in Hebrew and then in English. Page 60. Sof davar hakol nishma. Et Elohim yirah v'et mitzvotov shmor ki zeh kol ha'adam. The end of the matter, after everything is considered, revere God, keep his commandments, because that's what humanity is all about. In other words, the only reason God created humans is because of the sake of the Torah. In other words, it's all about purpose. It's all about what is the mission. It's not about, do I want to be happy? It's all about why did I come into being? And if I came into being. Now, I may have talents because God gave me the talents that through these talents I can fulfill the mission. I may have wisdom. You know, there were people that would go to college and they would want to stop and they would want to go to yeshiva and they would write to the Rebbe, ask the Rebbe, and they were very successful in their studies. And the Rebbe would, to most of them, say, continue your studies. On the contrary, excel in them, because through that, you'll be able to do your mission. What was their mission? Their mission was, one in particular was Dr. Block. Irving Block, his Hebrew name was Yitzchak Block. He had a North Carolina connection because his mother and his sister lived in North Carolina. But I knew him from when I was a little kid. He was a professor, he was a graduate of Harvard, and he was a PhD in philosophy. He specialized in very, very high philosophy. Now, he originally was from Nashville, Tennessee, and the reason I mention his story is because when he was a young man, he lost his father. He started to say Kaddish. It got him interested in Judaism. And Rabbi Zalman Posner, who was the Chabad rabbi in Nashville, Tennessee, introduced him to yeshiva. So he came to New York and he started looking at different yeshivas. The first yeshiva that he tried out in 1957 was the Chabad school. And it was in an unair-conditioned hall. It was like reminiscent of the shtetl. So he was there for a little while, and then he went to some other places that were very fancy. And after a few days, he came running back because it didn't give him the sense of fulfillment. And he loved studying until he went into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said that when you finish this year's study, you have to go back to college, and you have to excel in your studies. And he became a very great philosopher. And with that philosophy, which he compared with the theology of Kabbalah, he was able to engage thousands of Jewish students and bring them back to Jewish life because he knew both sides of the coin. And he would do all kinds of studies and experiments with them. He was a fascinating man. He was just very fascinating, unassuming. And he used to come to North Carolina, so he would stay at my house. And he was the perfect example of mission-oriented, purpose-oriented, because he would say, oh, if I could only be in yeshiva, and if I could only be in a very religious neighborhood, I would be a religious city, I would just be like a fish in water. And instead, I have to be in this college campus, and I have to deal with college kids the whole time with philosophy. But at the end of the day, that's what the Rebbe wanted from him, and he was very successful. So the point of the matter is that if you're mission-oriented and purpose-oriented, then you know that that's your source of satisfaction. What takes us out of depression, what takes us out of aimlessness and loneliness is when we find our purpose. And when we find our purpose and we know what our purpose is, even though the circumstances may be very difficult, we know we're doing the right thing. And it gives us a whole different way of looking at Judaism. When I have a mitzvah that comes my way, I don't say, okay, I'm in a grocery store now. I'll choose this mitzvah and that mitzvah. I'll reject because it's not interesting. It doesn't resonate with me. It's not the way it works. If there's something that comes that only I can do, it means that it was meant for me and I have to do it. And I'm not absolved from not doing it unless I can't do it. Now, I'll finish with the famous story. The story is of a very wealthy man who was very studious and learned, hired a coachman because he had to go on a business trip, but he also was able to teach Talmud and teach Hasidus. And as they were traveling a long distance, they came to a town for Shabbat, and they decided to stop, and they went to an inn. Now, the coachman used to like to dress up like a rabbi every Friday because he wanted to feel dignified. So he went and got himself dressed as a rabbi with the nice silk coat and big hat. And he showered and he bathed and he went off to the synagogue to study. The wealthy man, who was also a rabbi, a real rabbi, was a little slow. And all of a sudden he hears a cry. And it was another coachman that said that my wagon got stuck in the mud and the horses can't come out. I need someone to help. So he says, oh, this is a mitzvah that came to me. Let me go do it. So he had never harnessed horses and he's never dealt with horses. He was only a passenger and a coach. But here he had the opportunity to do the mitzvah. So he ran with the coachman and he wasn't a big help. Not only that, his garments were torn, he was bruised all over, and he didn't help at all because he didn't know what he was doing. And meanwhile, the coachman who knew how to do it, the other coachman, was sitting in the synagogue and reading one of King Solomon's books, Shir HaShirim, inviting guests to come to the table. And when they come Friday night to the table, the coachman has nothing to give as far as words of wisdom. And the rabbi, the wealthy man, was sitting there licking his wounds. So it also means that one has to know what their capabilities are and what their talents are. And it doesn't mean that because you have purpose, so therefore anything that comes your way you have to do. You have to see whether it's something that you can excel, or if you have someone like the Rebbe that says this is what you have to do, then you know you have to do that. But in today's times, you have to really know that it should be something that you're cut out for. But once we find purpose, then it gives us difference of life. Now, in order to find purpose, we're going to learn next week. We're going to go and start dipping into Kabbalistic concepts. And one of the things that we're going to learn is about something which I'm going to give you a little preview. It's called Seder HaYishtalshalut. Seder HaYishtalshalut is a Kabbalistic term. Yishtalshalut comes from the word shalshelet, or sharsheret, but it's really shalshelet. What is a shalshelet? A chain. A chain has many links to it. It has many rings. One leads to the other, leads to the other. We learn in Kabbalah that the divine revelation doesn't come as one big burst, but the divine revelation has come down and condensed from one level to a lower level, to a lower level, to a lower level, until it comes to the point where we can actually absorb it. So starting from the highest level to the lowest level, that whole system is called Seder Ishtalshalut. Primarily, it's through the 10 Sefirot, which we're going to touch upon, the 10 faculties, starting with wisdom, ending with kingship, which right now we don't need to know what it is, but knowing that from the highest level, it can go to the lowest level. And give you a simple example, if you have a deep idea that's very rich in content and rich in meaning, and you want to share it with someone that's a novice or someone doesn't really understand it, if you're going to speak to them the language the way it is in your mind, you lost them. They won't be able to understand it. So you have to start condensing it without losing the meaning. But in the condensing it, you're going from one level, then you might use another example, or you might use another method of how to get to it until you come to the point that you say, now I'm ready to convey it and share it. That's the concept of Seder Ishtalshalut. And I'm not going to give you the secret of the Seder Ishtalshalut, but just to say that in the Seder Ishtalshalut, there's an upper and a lower. And usually our perception is that what is upper is higher and greater, and what is lower is inferior. Keep that in mind, because as we go to purpose, we're going to discover a whole new concept in regards to that. Thank you very much for joining, and we will meet with God's help next week, same time, same station, same place. Thank you very much for everybody joining me online.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
It's a pleasure.
Yashikar.
Thank you.
Lesson 2. To make.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Rabbi, do you teach the morning sessions too?
One second.